Hello. Okay, sounds good. Hi, welcome to Meme Streams and More. There will be a lot of and more. I'm Kat Zhang. I'm today's moderator. I am a culture writer at New York Magazine. I work for the women's vertical called The Cut, and prior to that, I was an editor at Pitchfork. And I am joined today by truly some of our greatest minds on the subject of how technology has changed the music industry in the 21st century. So to my left, we have Kieran Press-Reynolds, who is a culture writer based in Brooklyn, who writes the Rabbit Hole column for Pitchfork. So he's in all sorts of weird internet holes, and also edits the independent blog No Bells. And then to Kieran's left is Liam Inscoe-Jones, who is a writer, both fiction writer and nonfiction writer, and the author of a book, Songs in the Key of MP3, about radical music in the internet age, and 5 artists who have particularly shaped the 2010s. And then we have Margot, who is a music creator and content creator based in Brooklyn, New York. Lots of Brooklynites here. You may recognize her from her TikTok account, Marg MP3. She also has an NTS show and occasionally does things for Fashion Week.
Yes.
And then we have Yulia, who is the creative lead at Nuance and the creative director of Nuance magazine and a content creator. So let's give them a round of applause. One housekeeping thing. So the subject is pretty hefty. We're not going to be able to cover all of the 21st century and every single development that has happened. And also, you might have questions based on things that we say in the middle, and to make things easier and to make sure that we can answer as many questions as possible in the 30 minutes at the end of this panel. If you have any thoughts, there's a paper and pens over there, and so if you could write the questions down, and then I'll sift through them and maybe order them so the questioning process goes as smoothly as possible. And don't worry about interrupting or anything. Cool. So to just start us off, to help orient us, I'm just going to walk through a little bit of what happened in the 21st century, which honestly, half the time I don't remember. But taking us all the way back to the early 2000s, you see the rise of MP3s and digital downloading. And so we're entering this kind of online age, and we have digital piracy, sites like LimeWire. And then a decade later, we get streaming services coming in like Spotify, later SoundCloud, Apple Music, your titles, things like that. And then in 2018, Musical.ly merged with TikTok to become what we now know as TikTok. And we have this era of short-form video that is helping shape what is on our popular charts, the sound of our music, and like basically everything. And then we also have, and are reckoning with right now, AI, what that means for us as listeners, as producers, the state of our planet, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the big things that we're going to be talking about or referencing. We're not going to dive into like every single implication of these things. I think we're going to stay more focused on the past decade or so, but just to give you a sense of orientation. And then I wanted to ask Liam, you know, taking this bird's eye view of all of these different changes that happens, what are some common threads you're seeing in music and how music has changed since the early 2000s?
Yeah, so, wow. Yeah, so I think there's been a complete kind of flattening of certain characteristics by which music was distinguished in the 20th century. The most obvious and talked about of those being genre, and that a lot of artists now use genre more as a palette rather than as an absolute distinguishing feature, and that was obviously also a commercial distinguishing feature as well. I think sometimes that's a nothing thing, sometimes it's an inventive creative thing. Other times it makes music seem more amorphous and indistinct. I think in terms of music creation, obviously that's changed just so drastically because of the increased availability of more affordable tools such as portable microphones, portable MIDI players, DAWs. That just means that people can create music more readily in their own spaces, create them on the move, create them on other sides of the planet. Again, sometimes you can hear that in the music, other times it's not something that you're so conscious of. And in terms of listening habits, I think an underrated or underappreciated form of technology in terms of the impact it's had is things like noise-cancelling headphones, because you can really self-curate your entire musical existence. Like, I will walk through the whole day not hearing a piece of music that I haven't chosen for myself. On the flip side, you have things like algorithmic listening, where people don't make a single choice in their day, and they're kind of pointed and directed by streaming services and major labels. So yeah, I think those are three major ones.
Does anyone else have other things to add? And then I'll go to you directly, Julia, to see how, or I guess maybe I'll ask you directly. Does that ring true to you, as a Polish creator, or are there things that you feel are different?
I think when it comes to Poland and our Polish experience, everything's been very, very rap-centric. And I feel like that's what I think it's not the best thing for our market, to be honest, because the way we've been developing is that, even though rap is in the center of it all, and we can, it's not really helping us that we have this newfound systems of development and looking for music, while our mainstream is still very, very focused on rap. And I'm really, really open to hearing about new pop artists popping up and maybe go into that direction. So that's where we've been so far. So definitely different than what you were talking about. And yeah.
I have a follow-up question, which is, how did rap become the mainstream music in Poland?
To be honest, I feel like the main thing about it is I feel like people call rap everything now. It's kind of how everyone was saying that rap is the new pop. I think that's exactly what happened in Poland. And people who create music that, in my opinion, is very hyper pop focused, influenced, they don't even realize that what they're doing is hyper pop. They just call it rap or trap. So I feel like there's really not a lot of knowledge on how to qualify genres, and it's not about being open and mixing it all. It's more about just calling it all rap because that's what's popular and that's what's gonna get you to playlists, that's what's gonna get you views, that's what's gonna get you magazine covers. So I think just the fact that, let's talk about even magazine covers like Vogue, the only musical artist that got it was Bambi and Mata, who are both described as rappers. So I don't know, I just find it very sad actually, because we do have a lot of talented musicians, which you're gonna see partly at Unsound, that are, very far from it, and they don't really get recognized. So even though we have all these tools for finding music, and a lot of people use it, obviously, in the right way, it's really hard to break the rap algorithm here in Poland, so yeah.
What do mainstream music listeners value, and how does that propel them towards listening to this type of rap, this hyperpop rap, I guess, that you're talking about?
Well, it's actually hard to say. I think Polish people, I think there's some kind of generational trauma of insecurities that we have. We are very much focused on doing what people the West is doing. And I think a lot of Polish artists are very inspired by what rap was let's say 5-10 years ago in the States. And I feel this, I don't know, range of insecurities has influenced how people are very stuck to this one thing that, found them to be successful. So basically, we're repeating what gave people fandoms, let's say 5 years ago. So I think people are really afraid to let it go and try something new because it worked once. So why wouldn't it work, 20 more times and doing the same tunes on the same beats? So I think that's why. I think it's kind of, people are just afraid to do something more experimental.
And does what Liam was saying about the general like cheapness, abundance, and like frictionlessness of music feel true to you in Poland?
Well, it's actually hard to say because obviously it's cheaper and it's easier to like experiment and it gives people the freedom to experiment. But I feel like the market is so small in a way that it kind of makes you afraid to experiment. Like obviously you have like all these tools to create music that is like different, that you can, you know, test and like basically develop something fresher, but people still don't do it. I don't know why, like when it comes to mainstream, obviously, because when we are fighting for your audiences and you have like mainly like 3 big festivals in Poland, people are still gonna like try to head for something that's quite flat.
One more question for you, and then I'll broaden it out. Who would you say are what are the gatekeepers in the industry right now?
Interesting. Interesting and hard because I feel like I wouldn't say TikTok is the gatekeeper because last month there was a research released about how TikTok is actually not really that influential when it comes to creating fandoms. So I wouldn't say that TikTok actually like is the only way to get popular and doesn't like kind of, you know, your song doesn't have to be viral to actually like make you succeed. So what I would say is definitely playlist makers. Because as I said, like most of the playlists that you're gonna go through that are like based on like Polish artists are always rap focused. Even if it's like, you know, New Music Friday, you're gonna see mainly rap music. So like, I think these are the people who have the power but don't exercise it to like open, you know, people for different things, especially like here in this market, because I know that it's not the same thing somewhere else. So speaking from my experience.
And opening up, and anyone can respond to this, what do we think are some of the dominant values of music today, whether it's like a certain kind of boundarylessness and omnivorousness, where it's like blending different genres, or it's less cool to just like stick within one lane. I'm sure there are other ones that people can think of.
Yeah, I think for, you know, it depends on who you are as a listener. I think some people value the fact that you can listen to something and have like 8 or 50 different reference points, and it feels like, especially in our like post 100 gecs world, you want to listen to something that is like madly oscillating between sounds. But I think also there's a lot of value, people find a lot of value in something that picks like one genre and then innovates on it rather than just kind of mashing a bunch of things together. If you can find something and do something really weird with it that nobody's done before, or like Geese right now, people love Geese, people saying they're reinventing rock, you know, I don't know if I'm fully on board with that, but there are a lot of ways I think you can tackle music in a fresh way, and I think, you know, so much music online and like post TikTok and post SoundCloud rap tends to be very short, so I think now people are starting to value longer things that you spend more time on rather than just like singles you're puking out. You know, a real world that you can craft. I think a lot of fans and listeners like something that you can get lost in.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, I feel like, yeah, innovation when it comes to genre is something that listeners, or at least listeners like myself, who kind of, you know, voraciously are consuming music on a daily basis value. But I feel like innovation that kind of piggybacks off of just like leaning into nostalgia. I feel like so many people, especially like given how the state of the world is right now, is they're using music and various forms of art and culture as a means of escape. I mean, people always have, but especially now when people are just spending more time online than engaging in real life, I feel like people are wanting to really lean into their different forms of cultural and just like consumption of entertainment through just escapism. And so I feel like they're wanting people to, or musicians and creators that are, I guess, wanting to innovate in whatever medium that they're consuming, but they're wanting to forget about the present day in order to just like have just like a brief moment of like, I don't know, thinking about something that isn't making them feel terrible. So I feel like having some nostalgic aspects, which can, I guess, be applied to so many of the prominent, I guess, more experimental or like artists across the board right now, I think people are really, really valuing. They're wanting to be reminded of happier times or music that they connected with during their formative years. I feel like that's always been very like highly valued, just leaning into nostalgia, but in a way that feels new and fresh to the listener.
I think like a defining quality is like absolute lack of kind of coherence in terms of even how people talk about their experiences of music. Because sometimes a lot of music writers will talk about, oh, the mainstream's vanished and there's no real mainstream. And then other friends of mine who are very casual music fans will be like, what are you talking about? It's just like it's Sabrina Carpenter, it's Chapel Mirror, and it's just like there is a mainstream. And I think the same is like I've had conversations with people who very much think like all music is very reiterative and it's just kind of repeating the sounds of the 20th century. And then other people who, and I would put myself in this bracket where I'm just like, are constantly finding things which feel fresh and new and are challenging and interesting. And I think, I mean, that's why I mentioned things like the noise cancelling AirPods and obviously algorithms are also a big part of this. People are funneled into completely separate lanes, and so there's way less mutual understanding, which obviously you can also just see reflected in politics as well. And I think that's become one of the defining threads of the time as well.
Yeah, I would. I have maybe two I'd like to add in addition to it. I think world building is right. Nostalgia, definitely, I see that. This kind of incoherence that you're talking about. I think an obsession with authenticity, like which manifests in the confessional form of songwriting that Taylor Swift and her descendants, her sons, if you will, adopt, and or what Tay daughter, is that the term? And even no, it's like a stan term for. But even for artists who don't, like lyrics are not so central to their music, or they're not necessarily writing about themselves, like even the profiles of them or the Spotify descriptions of them are all very much about their like who they are and where they grew up, and there's a lot of emphasis on biography in that way. And then there's both kind of like hyper intensity and like standum, like really extreme ways of describing music that you love or hate. On Tuesday at his lecture, Jeremy Larson referred to something as the sucks, kicks ass binary, or it's like either it's so awesome or like it should never see the light of day, and how dare this person ever release music. At the same time, he also put this statistic up that says that people from the ages of 16 to 25 have, like, they are less likely to find music that they actually feel very passionate about relative to people who are in maybe the 25 to 36 age bracket. And I have a younger sister, just anecdotally that seems true, where she's just, there's so much music, she seems less passionate about any individual artist, with the exception of Taylor Swift. But looking online, that maybe like passivity or an indifference is not reflected in the online discourse. But then so let's break some of this stuff down. We're covering a lot of like discovery, production, things like that. Let's start with discovery. I would love to know, just as a general prompt, who is a recent artist that you've discovered that you love, and where did you find them?
I found this duo named EQ from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I found them from, I think it was Nina Protocol, which is like very funny. They're like this kind of Spotify alternative that might be like crypto Web3 in some way, so not really a full cosign, but they put out some cool little like guides and like interviews with artists. And yeah, EQ, they're kind of doing like indie sleaze if it was good, and with like actually sexy songs and yeah, cool beats.
I discovered something which was, so I saw the new Paul Thomas Anderson film, and then I found a Substack, which I think is a good example of like roles that music writers can still play, where they were listing out kind of a playlist inspired by the soundtrack to that film. And rather than it being whatever Spotify might have come up with, it was very much kind of vibes based. It was nothing that someone would be like, oh, you know, it's composed by Johnny Greenwood, so we're going to do a Radiohead song. It was very much atmosphere and vibe, which I think is something that it takes an actual person to put together. And then one of the songs on there was by a Norwegian jazz percussionist called Thomas Strønen, who I looked up and turns out has like 70 albums. But I went for a walk this morning and listened to one of his albums while walking along the river, and it was a really nice vibe, and it was very chaotic and elegant at the same time. So that was one.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to think of individual artists because I am mostly listening to so many different albums by different artists, just like throughout the week. But just thinking about it just now, I've been really into this singer-songwriter from the 80s named Judy Zuke. I don't know if I'm saying her last name right, spelled Tzuke. And I've been re-getting into her like in the past couple of months. I first discovered her music in 2023 by hearing a song on NTS radio. But my re-obsession with her has happened in the past couple of months because I was in like a home goods store in Brooklyn, and I heard this song come on, and I Shazammed it. And then I discovered that it was Judy. I listened to the full record, and then I've just been listening to that record on repeat for the past couple of months. And then I recently talked with an artist, and she mentioned Judy, and she was like, you gotta listen to this album. So yeah, just like through hearing a song out in the wild, and then also talking about it with peers in the space, that usually it feels the best to me.
I'm gonna be really basic, I'm sorry, because I found mine for Spotify. I was listening to Schmerz, who are playing tonight, by the way, and I was just looking for similar artists, and I found Horse Vision, and I found it really cool. So, you know, basic, but also, I think it's really important to highlight that this is also okay. To be finding music through mainstream ways, okay?
There's no shame.
Yeah, no basic.
No shame. I'm very, I did this, you know, I'm very brave, so I did this for everyone here.
Yeah, I mean, it segues great into my next question, which is just how do we think the average person, what are the ways the average person is finding new music now?
I think a lot of it is like definitely Spotify and like recommendations. Like TikTok is huge. It's an interesting thing where it's like, we're talking about how, or you said there was like a survey that showed that wasn't making lasting fandoms. I think TikTok is really good at creating like huge spikes in one song, you know, and it creates this kind of like one-hit wonderkind kind of situation. And yeah, you know, someone might find their favorite song off there, but then they won't go and listen to the actual artist. And I think that's happening a lot because it is just like this passive consumption cyclone. And yeah, I feel like those are probably two of the main methods people use.
Yeah, that's exactly what the report said, by the way, that, you know, like a lot of people, it's, you know, it depends on what we mean by, you know, finding out and discovering new artists, because like, yeah, you can know who they are, but you're not gonna become their fan. You're not gonna like go and listen to their music and stream it. So like, I think it said that less than a half of people on TikTok are gonna go to like and stream the music that they like off of TikTok. So I feel like that's kind of giving you the idea of like what role TikTok has, and it can start off maybe someone's career, but it's never gonna like be the main thing that kind of helps you do it. And I think YouTube was the first and most popular way of finding new music, according to the report, not according to me. Important.
Yeah, just going off of that, it's I mean, you know, as a creator in the space, mainly posting to Instagram and TikTok, it is really hard to get people to go off platform or even like click a link that, you know, technology has made it easier than ever to just, I don't know, be prompted with something, and yet it feels harder than ever for people to kind of just hold their focus and like go to a different platform. And because, TikTok is such a unique social media app and people are inundated with content at a level and pace that is very unlike the other social media apps, I feel like TikTok doesn't really have as much of a lasting effect as it did even a couple years ago when it really was booming and just, really saw a rise during the pandemic, 2020, 2021. But I feel like in order for fans to like build like a lasting connection with music, it kind of has to be contained within specific platforms. That's why Spotify has maintained such a dominance, like since its beginning, really, but especially in the past couple of years. I feel like, we're in this time when discourse around Spotify, at least, for active music fans, which I feel like most people in this room are, it's largely negative discourse, very rightfully so. But I feel like what keeps like the average like passive music listener hooked is its discovery features, where people maybe go on the platform, they don't really know what they want, and they just want to be fed stuff because they just don't want to have to make another cognitive decision. So, which I understand, like it makes it easy. So I feel like, if you like this artist, you'll love all of these. And is it a real person? That's not for you to know, but who cares? Just listen to them. The algorithmic playlists have always dominated, both like curated by Spotify editors and the ones that are, AI generated, based off like whatever the user is interested in. I don't know, a lot of people are just still using Spotify as the main discovery method, at least people that I talk to. It's the truth, so.
Kieran, how do you think that AI is affecting the way that people discover music?
I think, AI, it's basically like adding to this passive consumption, way of listening to music that Spotify and other DSPs have already facilitated, where you might have something sent to you and you're not going to do the work to like read about them, and these platforms don't really provide any context anyway, so you're not really incentivized to do research. And then now AI, like with Suno and Udio, these platforms where you can type in text and just like basically generate a full song, or you can even do like, you can tell them to use specific instruments and they can do that. There's been this like massive flood of AI music in like every genre. I've been tracking it and written a few stories over the past few months, and like stuff that you wouldn't even expect. Like you would think that AI could take over like lo-fi beats, something that's super, you play it at the coffee shop and you don't pay attention, you listen to like a 24-hour radio stream. But now it's starting to get into like vocal music. Like there was this big scandal with the Velvet Sundown, this like psych rock band that had over 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify that wasn't actually real. I spoke to a bunch of artists from like different communities, like the city pop music community and like lo-fi beats, and they say that like they've been displaced, they've lost money from like the curation, either the curation or like the actual music in some cases that they were making, because they've been either like taken off of playlists and where AI music is now dominating, or just because on YouTube they've been heavily downgraded in the search algorithm, because for some of these more passive listening genres, you can create like an 8-hour playlist in like a few minutes with AI, and so these AI grifters are essentially putting out like multi-hour mixes every day, and that just dominates the algorithm. And it's like increasingly, it's getting worse increasingly because the technology is also getting better, and it's really hard to tell in some instances like what's just like a mid-song versus AI. And I think a lot of people are comfortable listening to a mid-song, so they don't really care. It's gonna get worse.
Margot, as someone who recommends music on TikTok and, like very non-mainstream music, things that a lot of people have never heard of, experimental stuff, music from, all across the globe. I first am just curious to know how you made the decision to start a TikTok, and then second, what you've learned or like takeaways that you've gotten from your several years of being on there?
Yeah. Well, I started making TikToks mainly as a means of self-expression. Like throughout my life, I've never really had anyone to really talk about my deepest musical interests with. So I first started my Instagram account in 2019, and I was just posting album covers and writing about the albums. And then I quickly realized that people weren't really going on Instagram to like read music reviews. They want to watch things. And then, the pandemic happened, and a lot of my friends were like, I really like your posts. You should start making videos. And I was always very apprehensive because TikTok at the time was very different than how TikTok is now, where I feel like, I don't know, it just seemed, it is still like pretty abrasive and overwhelming and overstimulating, but I feel like it was just more extreme content back then, or just kind of senseless, so I didn't identify with it. But I started making TikToks in April of 2021. By June 2021, I started getting viral videos off of things that I thought would never, ever, people would never see. So yeah, and then I've just been making videos on TikTok and Instagram since then over these past 4 years. Major takeaways, which I feel like kind of make me in a way an anti-creator, because I probably am not following smart rules of thumb for someone that wants to prosper and dominate in these online spaces, but it's fine. I feel it's just not really my thing. I feel like it's really easy to get distracted by what other people are doing, especially on apps like TikTok, which is I feel like why TikTok is so popular, because it's really good at generating very easily replicable trends that take 2 seconds to do. Dances aside, dances I feel like can be kind of intense. But yeah, I feel like, TikTok is really great at getting people to spend as much time on the app as possible. And the more time that you spend on it, at least for someone like me, and the average consumer, not just producers like myself, but yeah, it's easy to get influenced and distracted by what's really important to you. Like you see so many people doing this thing, and you're like, I should do it too because this thing is trending, and I should talk about it, or I should make a video like this for myself, which works for a lot of people. But I feel like the more time that I've spent engaging in content like that, it strays me further away from what I really care about or what I really feel is genuine to me. So in my years of being a creator on the app and on Instagram as well, I actually spend less time just consuming because I'm just passively watching videos, because I have to have that boundary in place to maintain my creative integrity. So that's been a huge takeaway. I feel like anything that I could say right now just goes back to the biggest takeaway is, yeah, just having boundaries in place when it comes to my activity on these apps in order to maintain my authenticity as a creator, my integrity, and just, yeah, staying genuine and true to myself, So sounds cliche, but it's cliche for a reason.
You mentioned some videos that you're surprised popped off. What are some examples, and are there ones where you're genuinely happy that they perform because it seemed you're like, oh, people actually like and want interesting kind of avant-garde stuff? Yeah,
I feel like when I first started gaining prominence on the app, TikTok because that's where I first started posting videos, my first kind of viral videos that were getting hundreds of thousands of views in the span of a couple days. I think my first one was a video about Faye Wong, who's a very popular singer, or was a popular singer in the 90s, has songs in Cantonese, has songs in Mandarin, also had a prominent role in Chungking Express, the Wong Kar-wai film, and I feel like I was drawing a lot of comparison between her and Cocteau Twins, because the two, Faye Wong and Cocteau Twins, were collaborating and covering each other's songs, and I'm a fan of both, so when I made that connection in real time, I felt like I had to make a video about it. So that was my first really big video, which I never, ever thought people would be into, but that was cool. I feel like one of my trademarks is like talking about albums or just like making album recommendations of albums that I think are underrated. So that was a really big video, just like talking about different albums that I've never heard other people talk about online. That really popped off when I first started making videos. But, you know, the algorithms on these apps are constantly changing, so I feel like my content, I mean, I know that my content isn't really getting a lot of traction on spaces like TikTok these days because of the changing algorithms and what the kind of content that the app is favoring these days. So I've leaned more into Instagram, honestly, that has a slightly older, I guess, broader age demographic. So yeah, I've just kind of had to move with the trends, or I guess not move with the trends, which is why I've leaned less into TikTok. Yeah.
How do we think that the sound of music has changed, like, because of various platforms? So maybe we could start with even just something like Spotify, and I don't know, Kieran, if you want to take that one and go into SoundCloud as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think with Spotify, I think the thing that comes to mind most for me is like the Lorem playlist style of music, which is like going back to this sort of like genre fusion, kind of like bedroom poppy thing that became really popular, partly because it, you know, there's sort of like low stakes to it, and it's kind of like low effort. In some ways, some of it is really good for sure, and a lot of music on TikTok or on Spotify would also, for a time, try and like game the system by making it really short, or stream grift in that way. That's like kind of the main things for me for Spotify, though there are lots of different things you could talk about. On SoundCloud, I think there's a big emphasis on like just DIY weirdness. A lot of like micro genres have formed on SoundCloud, and people pushing like fragments of, for example, in like trap music, people pushing it into like plug music and punk metal and like all these different kind of like micro iterations. It is weird because people talk about a lot like the death of monoculture or fragmenting in some way, but while there is that, there are, I don't know, still like macro trends and a lot of bigger artists. I mean, even though there are so many micro scenes, I think there's like a lot of like almost the middle class of musicians, and there are still huge stars. So yeah, I feel like there's a kind of a continuity also between like trends on SoundCloud and TikTok with like this mixture of memeing and seriousness. Like there's a big fusion, partly ushered in by 100 gecs, which is like mixing like very insane sounds with very inane stuff and kind of blending the lines there. On TikTok, I remember a few years ago, there was this whole rush of like video game themes that were going viral that were like edited with like fart sounds and just like weird bathroom noises, and it was getting millions of plays. And I'm like, is anyone actually listening to this? But it was partly because of the videos that would go viral with. And there's this other scene called Digicore that partly came out of like SoundCloud and then TikTok viral songs that had a lot of people messing around with like stutters and these other kind of seemingly doofy effects and really like pushing the taste boundaries on what's acceptable. And I think, yeah, TikTok really helped usher that in.
Liam, you might have a slightly more optimistic lens. You've written about some artists who defined the 2010s and made, you know, this ethereal and sort of multi-genre music that you argue couldn't have existed before. Can you talk about some of them, and what do you think, what conditions allowed for them to make the music that they did?
I think a lot of people responded to the state of the internet in kind of a counter-cultural way, as in counter to the direction that kind of the industry was heading in, or how other artists might utilize things like nostalgia. I talked about the artists who champion and integrate musicians of the past who have been overlooked or were denigrated in their time, or people like Arthur Russell, whose music simply wasn't available. who had some music available, but most of his catalogue has been released after his death in the time of the internet. And it was crazy that I spoke to people like, I spoke to the director like Josh Safdie, I spoke to Caroline Polacek, Nicholas Jarre, and they all cited people like Alice Coltrane, someone who really had very little commercial impact at all in their time, as a major influence. And it's weird, there's kind of this like alternative universe of the 20th century where some of the most obvious influential figures haven't been the more influential influences on the artists of kind of that might be championed or critically acclaimed in the moment. There's also people who can highlight some of the racial boundaries by which people were undervalued, or even their work just simply not preserved, like the composer Julius Eastman. That's someone who Devonte Hines has championed a lot and has played a lot of recitals of his work. Then there's people who use a lot of digital manipulation to kind of make themselves more ugly or portray themselves as more vulnerable in a time when we're obviously encouraged to beautify ourselves. And I think that's what a lot of SoundCloud people do as well. I think that's why they're pretty into some of these like pretty gnarly sounds. I think those are some kind of directions people have taken. I think also in this time of immediate access in terms of music making, it means a lot of rap music is over-represented more. It's kind of an antiquated term, but like working class voices. I feel like a lot of people wouldn't classify themselves in that way, but people who don't have a much immediate wealth or resources can make and produce music, and you see that represented in lyrics of a lot of American and British rappers who I can kind of attest to. They're talking about things that most people aren't speaking about, because in order to make music, you kind of have to come from some form of generational wealth if you're making a certain type of music that requires resources and funds. So I think there's been some positives in those directions.
Margot, I'm interested in your earlier comment about nostalgia and people's impulse towards nostalgia. Are there certain like genres that you see people gravitating towards now, or like sound revivals? How is nostalgia manifesting in music now?
Yeah, I feel like it's happening across all genres. It's not really limited to any specific, I guess, sonic field. But I guess also touching back on your earlier question about how how music is sounding now, I feel like as new and emerging artists, they're getting younger and younger. They're mostly born after the year 2000. So I guess, coming up or just growing up at a time when they've never not grown up without having access to the internet. And so as, these young emerging bands are, coming out and gaining prominence, I feel like a trend that, incorporates nostalgia in a way that previous, I guess, like eras of music didn't have, is that they're pulling from so many different decades all at once, because they've had access to music, like all music that has ever been made for their whole life. Whereas, I want to say all of us can remember a time when we didn't have the internet, even if it was like in our early life. But, new emerging bands, Kieran, you mentioned Geese earlier. They're pulling from rock music over the past, I don't know, it's 2025 now, at least 40 years, if not more. But I feel like they're leaning into nostalgia, not just Geese, but a lot of new emerging artists, in a way that's more expansive and harder to pinpoint for fellow young listeners. If you're older, you're gonna be able to be like, oh yeah, this reminds me of this like late 60s psych rock record, or you're gonna be able to have those exact, you're gonna be able to know those exact references. But to audiences that are maybe the same age as the band, they're gonna be like, oh yeah, this reminds me of this band, but that band was referencing something even earlier. So I feel like new emerging artists and bands are utilizing nostalgia in a way that is maybe unprecedented, because they have just like everything at their disposal and resource. And that in combination with having access to, production resources and ways to make music that also was maybe unavailable on such like a larger scale. Yeah, they're like utilizing nostalgia in ways that have not been done before, which makes it really cool and unique. And it also, in a way, inspires me as a listener that, young people are, I'm also a young person, but even younger than me, that are like, wow, they're listening to so much cool stuff. Like, music it's still exciting. So yeah, it can be a bit jarring and confusing, but in a surprisingly positive way, at least for me as an enthusiastic music listener.
Mm-hmm. Yulia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember you had said that like many of the top 10 artists in Poland are like YouTubers. Is that right? No? Okay.
That's maybe the discovery where they find it.
Yeah.
I was saying that it's like the most popular way of finding music, YouTube. Like that's what I was saying.
Yeah, or I think maybe it was someone else who was telling me yesterday that there was like a big crossover between like kind of like YouTube influencers and vloggers or something.
Sadly,
and, like, rappers.
there is definitely a rise of like influencer rappers, but gladly I didn't say that, but it is the truth. Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like it's something that's been happening like globally, but it's definitely been a trend here. Not exactly a trend that people are excited about, but I feel like there is a huge like arc of influencers coming like becoming rappers in a, I would say, kind of toxic way, because I think a lot of YouTubers in Poland, the most popular ones, there is always some, maybe not always, I won't say always, pathology in it. Like there's always like basically preying on very young listeners and audiences. So turning it into rap careers can be sometimes tricky, and I'm definitely not a fan, but yeah, it's definitely been a trend as well.
Yeah, how are you like broadly seeing platforms like YouTube or TikTok affecting the sound of music in Poland?
Well, it's definitely been, actually I have a perfect example of influencer turned rapper that now is trending on TikTok, and I think like it's clear that everyone's thinking about the songs like it's hook focused. It's kind of thinking about what's gonna be a new trend on TikTok, what's gonna be used as a next dance, like and even the length of song itself is gonna be influenced by how people want to perceive it and what's gonna be better like listened to on streams. So it's definitely been influenced. What I find very interesting is also the form of it, that it has to be visual as well. I think music nowadays like has to be visual, but not in a long form, but always in a short form. So I think Inji is a perfect example of that. A girl who like popped up on TikTok. I think she's like the OG TikTok star. So I think what she's been doing is very interesting. It's like thinking about short video forms that are gonna basically draw all the right target audience. So,
yeah. I'm interested in this, and to ask everyone else too. Like now that like going viral on TikTok doesn't necessarily guarantee that you as an artist get recognized or have a fan base. What are then things that artists have needed to do to promote themselves and their music, to break through like all of the noise and all of the options that listeners have now?
I think you have to have some kind of social media presence or engagement. It's the obvious answer, but I just think it's true. It's even like when I published my book, my publisher told me I need a good book and a good Twitter, and I was like, oh, I don't have either of those things. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's it's hard to imagine. And by social media, I don't just mean like the absolutely like Instagram or TikTok accounts. I mean like you need to either cultivate a following on platforms like SoundCloud or have your base in Discord or something. Like you need to have some kind of engagement.
Yeah, I feel like community and grassroots. That's like the way a lot of my favorite artists are people who are kind of in the underground and like they're not super big, and they're not really trying to get a TikTok hit either. Like, that's not their goal, because they know, like, a lot of the big TikTok songs are like funk detritus that's, you know, racking up like 20 million streams. Is gonna sound like looks maxing videos. And I think these people want like a more, they know they need a more sustainable career, and like, I think they're happy with, you know, I'm sure they love to get a lot of streams, but they are like, they're happy at the level of like 500K, a million monthly streams, and they, you know, they perform in real life and they sell merch and all these other things. And like, I think for them, it's like a friend community thing that they love doing, and they don't really feel like they need to play the icky game of viral baiting.
I think the most important thing is like a very coherent aesthetic that a person has to have. I think a great example is also like going back to the nostalgia thing, is the kind of the comeback of Tumblr aesthetic and how Bass Victim is using that, how Snow Strippers are using that. Like, I think it's very kind of connects to the community that you're looking for. So people who are like very into like a coherent aesthetic that, for example, like goes back to the Tumblr times. I think that's what kind of helps you draw attention of people that you want to be your listeners.
Yeah, I also think of things like the Apple Girl at the Charlie XCX Brat shows, or like the Sally at the role model shows, where it's like someone in the audience is chosen to be the star of the night. Often these people are like other famous people, but it works to create like a viral moment for like every single show, as opposed to just like the tour overall. And it makes people feel more invested because this stuff is happening live. Are there other examples of like immersive experiences or like live things that people are doing now to try to break through and promote themselves in sort of like internet age and in the attention economy?
Andrew Yang just hosted a no phones offline party in New York. He's not a musician, but it was a terrible party.
I don't have the exact example, let's say, but I think like what you're saying is that the offline experience is so important right now, that people are like starting to like build these experiences around them. Also not a music example, but Lias, who's like doing the fashion watch parties, I think is a perfect example of how to build communities around something that is kind of seems like exclusive thing. So I think music is also exclusive in a way. Even at live shows, there is some kind of barrier. So I think just kind of breaking down this barrier is going to be the big trend in music as well.
Can someone tell me the time? I think I'm kind of worried that we're majorly over. 3:24. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, cool. We'll do like 5 more minutes and then we'll open up to the audience. I realized that my idea of having people write down questions is not going to work, so we'll stick to the normal format. So I'm interested in like the economy of music now, and I guess a general question that I would start with is like, who is getting paid now, like in our streaming system, like in the attention economy, and who is not?
I don't think artists are getting paid particularly well, and I would. This is a genuinely open question that I really wish I could quantify, but I wonder the extent to which that is something that has shifted, or whether it's something that was kind of perpetually the case. I don't really think the history of 20th century music was a history of people being paid particularly well either. And I think your average kind of working musician, kind of like a journeyman musician, could probably just afford to be that more in the same way that your average kind of person working an accountancy job or working the tills in a supermarket could afford to do that more, because cost of living was less, rent prices were less, there was less social inequality. So I do wonder the extent to which these changes are more just embodying general economic changes that are seen, across national lines. On the other hand, obviously there are just increased monopolies. People talk constantly about Spotify and streaming services for good reason, but also the consolidation of the major labels is significant. There were like 6 in the 90s. Now there are 3, but that only tells part of the story because they've bought so many of their indie labels, places like NTS, Bandcamp, like those outlets which were more grassroots, and then being reincorporated into the bigger conglomerate. So I just think there's a monopolization and consolidation, and obviously the people who get the money in those cases are the capital owners, i.e. the CEOs and the executives and shareholders.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like music has just been devalued so much in general by DSPs, and one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is the way that, you'll have these like one-off viral songs now, and they, rack up a lot of money, I'm assuming, I think, on TikTok and like from the streams on Spotify. And there are these labels now that are kind of like not real labels. They'll be like the arm of a bigger label. Like there's this YouTube channel, Trap Nation, and I learned that the guy who runs that account created a label, I think it's called Broke, but there's like a subsidiary within Broke where it's just solely dedicated to finding like popular funk songs on TikTok, these ones that are made by like people in random countries just like in 3 hours on their computer, and it gets like 50 million streams because it's so basic. And this guy will like scout them and then lock them into a really bad deal where it's like, I'll give you 10K up front, which might sound like a lot, but then over time it generates like $200,000 in royalty. And because of the contract that this guy locks, like these probably 16, 17-year-olds in, they're just profiting off of all that. And I think that's happening with a lot of these like less like real songs in a sense, like songs that are built more for passive listening. And like I think with AI now, more money is gonna go to like the DSPs and to the people who are churning out this stuff than actual musicians.
One thing that haunts me is that, venture capitalists are investing in people's music catalogs and then paying newer artists to sample these really famous hits. So then like the value of the catalog appreciates. And so part of the nostalgia complex is just like, we feel alienated by our times. And then part of it is like completely manufactured for some guy in a suit. I would argue that people who are not getting paid are music journalists now, what is the state of music journalism today? Like what kinds of journalism maybe are being prioritized?
Yeah, Nuance, Nuance is a media platform that focuses on pop culture. I'm just gonna like drop it here so everyone knows what I'm talking about. About 2 years ago, we've completely changed the strategy, and we've moved from mainly focusing on our website to focusing on short-form videos on Instagram and on TikTok, which has proven very successful because I'm here. So, yeah, I think that's what's kind of the key is kind of turning music journalists into successful content creators, and kind of to save media platforms. It's kind of, I think, I'm just going to go back to one thing. Basically, we have media we have media and we have journalists, and I think there's a huge difference in how we can perceive a journalist who can be a content creator by himself, like for example, Lai, as I mentioned before, is a fashion journalist, and a media that kind of connects a group of journalists. So how can media save itself in times where people like artists don't need labels, so journalists don't need, media platforms to work for, to be honest. Like, I think that's kind of the direction we're going for. So as a media platform that we are, I think the most important thing is to kind of focus on kind of appreciating the content creators and like making them specialize in their own like sections, and knowing that people can come to us for content that is going to be valuable and it's going to be legit, because you can find everything on the internet. So I think media is I think there's going to be a tragic conflict between like analyzing who is a journalist and who is a content creator and not a journalist. I think there's like a huge conflict in that. So I don't know what you guys think, because like obviously we have journalists and we have content creators, and I think there's always something in between that we're all going to merge into. So
Wait, I have a follow-up question for you, which is, in these short form videos, like what do you cover in them? Are they like explainers of scenes? Are they like recommendations for new artists? Are they recaps of?
It's from news to like opinion-based pieces. I think like when I look at it, it's basically a website translated onto a video form, and I think it works. It works because people like obviously they want information in short form basis, but they also want them fast, and they want them like in a very like precise way. So obviously like a lot of media platforms still focus on written form, like in like carousels, but I feel like we're gonna definitely be focusing more on video form only, because that's what people has been showing their interest in. So yeah, everything to be answering your question.
Yeah, I think many people, maybe this is true for you too, Liam, are like both done written criticism and then also made videos, either like recapping what you wrote or recommending things. What is your experience of that been like, trying to work in both mediums?
I really agree with the kind of blurring of the lines. I think there is like some almost like parasocial component where when there's so much content already online, people want to see you as almost like an artist themselves, and they want to know your taste profile and be able to like almost guess what you'll like and what you don't like. And I think I've enjoyed making videos. I think I used to make a lot of videos on YouTube, so it feels pretty natural, like the idea of kind of taking this 2,000-word article and then just stripping out like the most salient points and figuring out kind of the game of like not just like selling it to people, but like just presenting it in this visual format. I think some articles are actually like way better to show in a visual format. So I feel like it's not the worst change. I think maybe like my more cynical takes are like with the fact that music journalism it's so, people aren't reading it as much and so hard to get a job in the career. It's like there's a lot less bandwidth to do like investigative stories and to like send people to like regions to cover things on the ground. And there might be more of an incentive to like only cover pop stars because that gets the most views, like rage baiting Taylor Swift and other artists so that you get their stan army on them or on you. And I think that like what will hopefully emerge is that like people will find niches that like you become the person for that niche, and then people read you because you offer a service that nobody else can do. Like there's so many people who will just, put out an update on something or like a very kind of milquetoast review of a bigger artist. And, if you can cover cool music and then there's an audience for that, I think if you can activate that audience, then it's cool. And I feel like I'm very blessed. I have like a column right now where I have a very long leash and I can explore weird things, but I wish more people had that opportunity.
Yeah, so many things that both of you touched on applies to me to a T, like really kind of niching down on something and just finding an audience that appreciates that. And I feel like, as a content creator, the kind of content that you are producing that directly is mirrored in the people that you're attracting. So I make it relatively like long form videos for social media. Like a lot of my videos are between like 1 to 3 minutes, which, is long for TikTok and Instagram. But, I'm an example of someone that appreciates, going deep. I'm sure most people in this room appreciate like going deep on their very musical interests. So these people exist, and there's always going to be a need for it. Like during this time when we're kind of, most of what we're inundated with is short form content, there is like a resurgence of wanting long form criticism and journalism in various formats. I mean, you know, YouTube has always prevailed, and YouTube has always been the platform that has treated its creators the best in terms of earning money. So, you know, a lot of videos are on YouTube. I mean, I will gladly watch like a 40-minute long YouTube video because, you know, people are doing that as opposed to like watching TV shows. I mean, I don't know, people are just consuming everything right now, but and for the foreseeable future. But I feel like during this period of just being inundated with short form content, people are gravitating towards long form or just wanting that. So I feel like we could be witnessing a shift into wanting meaningful criticism as opposed to just like valuing kind of frivolous, clickbaity entertainment.
I think that's why people are so interested in print again, and I think that's what we've been like working on as well. We're just working on our 4th newspaper that we're doing in the entire Poland, and what I find interesting is that people, I think they just want to find some balance in, you know, kind of still enjoying a short form, very like intense content, and then kind of touching the grass and just like looking through longer articles, but in paper. I think like that's the thing, like kind of no one wants the middle ground anymore. Like they just want either something that's really short and very digital and very fresh, or they want to kind of touch down on nostalgia again. So.
A concluding question for everyone along these lines is who or what makes you feel hopeful for the future of music? And so this could either be an artist whose work you find revelatory or, you know, futuristic or radical in some way, or like a trend like surge in interest in print media and in long-form journalism, or some musicians leaving Spotify, or you know, like I'm definitely noticing in New York a lot more like mini music festivals or trying to like rebuild a community scene again. And so I'm curious for you guys, what makes you feel optimistic?
Definitely mini festivals. As like when you said it, I immediately thought of Spokój Festival in Poland, which is very community based, and I think that's what makes me really hopeful, is that there are a lot of artists who want to create music not only for audiences but also for themselves, like, and for each other. So I think that's a perfect example of a festival where artists are supporting each other and, you know, just building a community around not only people who are listening to the music but also who are creating it. So I think that's very exciting that it's still happening. And there's been really a lot of like small festivals popping up in Poland in recent 2 years. So.
I think one thing that makes me very optimistic is like the resurgence of blogs, and just like, you know, when you get to a state where, I mean, blogs never went away really, but I think when you get to the state, this era where like you're basically getting paid nothing, if you're even getting paid at all, like you're getting a few hundred for a review, it's like the real heads are sticking around. Like the people who know that there's not much in it, they're gonna just like create some random ass website and just like go off on a limb and try and interview somebody, knowing that like, you know, all they're getting from it is like the gratification that comes with doing a really cool piece of journalism and like the community that they're building. And, you know, I think Substack is kind of cooked, but it is very nice seeing a lot of random people on the internet writing interesting like auto fiction and like random theories that would never get published in an actual publication. So it's like almost too much to keep track of. But yeah, I really like both of those aspects. And yeah, trying to stay optimistic, because I think there really is like, there's always going to be a space for music criticism. So.
In terms of music, I really like, there's a rapper from Florida called Neonte. He's just gone on tour with Young Lean, I think. But his music kind of taps into a kind of very scatterbrained, like post-regional, but kind of regionally diverse rap music, which I think is really good. And then on the flip side is my favorite album of the year, I think, is from Anastasia, who kind of fulfills the opposite impulse, where it's quite stark but really beautifully sung, brilliant songwriting. I think that's her debut LP. And then in terms of things I've seen that made me hopeful, I saw that the Irish government has given out grants, artist grants, to, I think, 2,000 artists. It's a trial program. They give about £400 a month. So it's basically like universal, it's not a month, a week. So it's like universal basic income for artists, basically. So yeah, I think more government should start giving money to artists.
Wow, America could never.
No.
Yeah, and then I guess to conclude our various picks, and going off of receiving ample arts funding from the government, I'm endlessly inspired by the Copenhagen music scene. I'm a very known fan of that whole thing they got going on online. And to those that might not be familiar, it's like artists like ML Book, Melina, Fina, I guess, yes, Smurs. I mean, they're Norwegian, but have strong, I think they just moved back to Copenhagen, if I'm not mistaken. Erica de Cassier, all of those kind of like experimental avant-pop girls. I love all of them. And also something that really gives me hope about it is that a lot of them are reaching prominence in their 30s and not like, oh, this artist is 14 years old and is killing the scene and yeah, just like dominating. It's like, yeah, these artists are going to art school in their late 20s, just now starting to make some of their best work, having children. I mean, granted, they're given the opportunities and funding and, yeah, resources to do so, but yeah, it's really inspiring to me. And it's music that, I guess, rewards patience as a listener. So it just kind of becomes more gratifying, I guess, the more time you spend with it. So, which is the kind of music listener that I am, so I love to see it.
I think it's really underappreciated how time and time again so much music has just been shaped by just money being available. Like people were like, oh, what was in the water in Manchester in the 70s? And there was nothing in the water, just money. They just had government money. So I think so many times for these big cultural moments that we think of as purely cultural moments were just funded by more sensible tax policy.
Love that. If anyone in the audience has questions for our panelists or for me, just raise your hand. I'm sure there are people walking around with mics. And if you could say who your question is directed to, that would be amazing.
Hi, my question is for all of you. So one of the things that I feel like I think about most when thinking about like the impact of the platform economy on music journalism and sort of like influencerization of music writing is the distinction between editorial and advertising, speaking of money. And I was wondering, as, if we're to be encouraging this blurring between who is a writer and who's a content creator, or at least like not opposing it, what responsibility do we have to sort of contribute to clearly demarcating what is editorial and what is advertising?
Yeah, no, I feel like that's really important. I feel like I see a lot of times, like, online, there is very much like an impulse to write PR in some instances, or like, I think a lot of people don't disclose sometimes when they get money from places, or at least as like, what I try to do is very clearly demarcate that line. And I think you can be like a content creator in a sense, like you can make videos and make TikToks without capitulating to that in any way. I think, that I feel like that's kind of like basic ethical journalism, is like, you're not doing something on behalf of the artist or like taking money, and especially not disclosing it if you are.
Yeah, I think it's, it's the responsibility of the creator to disclose and be transparent with their audience when they're receiving money for the content that they're making. But also, it would really be beneficial, like I'm seeing it from personal experience as a creator in a niche space, it's great if like audiences are understanding of the fact that, you know, these individual creators that they love, they have to understand that they can't do everything for free, and that, you know, if your favorite creator starts putting stuff behind a paywall, it's important to see their whole humanity and then realize that like they maybe, you know, I don't have any advertisers. I'm different from like media platforms that run advertising on their website. I don't really have that, and many creators don't have that on their social media. So, you know, you have to understand that like sometimes you have to put stuff behind a paywall or use platforms like Patreon, or, you know, do the occasional sponsored video from partners that might be slightly unrelated. But I think, you know, in this age where people are very savvy of how to become a content creator and like things that go into it, I think people are more understanding and supportive of when they do see that. And yeah, it's just, I think just like awareness around ways that people need to monetize sometimes, and just to be more understanding and not like, yeah, thrown off by that. But I think people are understanding, so that makes me hopeful.
Yo. Hey. Background over here. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, there's a lot of talks, as someone who's kind of, like, not that online and kind of, you know, broadly out of touch with how things are moving, and comes to something like this to sort of hear, like, what's going down. There's a lot of talk about, like, how everything's kind of gone, you know, we're returning back to being able to listen to a whole album, or returning being able to read long-form journalism. And is there anything that you guys see on, like, new platforms or through new technologies where you actually feel like, oh, the changing forms of these things is actually the people are doing something interesting with the fact that there's new capacities with music, that anyone's challenging the notions of albums or even just songs or linear music? Like, has anyone taken any of that new capacity to do something that feels genuinely exciting? Like, oh, maybe music in the 21st century isn't going to resemble music in the 20th century in an interesting way, rather than in like, oh, fuck, now no one can listen to an album anymore and everything's just trying to go viral, and like we're trying to teach people how to like stay focused for 40 minutes to listen to a whole thing, you know?
Yeah, I guess that one of my favorite, I think like maybe my favorite new genre of the 2020s is this like micro scene called Dariacore. It's a bit like if you took sound clown music, which is like these weird mashups, and you made it into like a fully fledged art form. It's by this musician Jane Remover under their alt account, and I think part of it is that it very much feels like it captures how your brain feels like surfing on TikTok 24/7, and like maybe this isn't a great thing to listen to if you're offline and you don't want brainworms, but it is like so accelerated, and it's like remixing. There's like this slight sort of like, you could say it's like nostalgic because it's like remixing these big pop songs and like TikTok songs, but it's very much like rewiring them to the point where you don't recognize them at all. And it might be like, you know, making a pop star in like nightcore, and like turn them into an alien in this very like 21st century. Everybody's an avatar that you can mold and squish in all these different ways. And there's like a whole community around it of people who are like wicked sound designers who are using DAWs and like these new plugins in really wonky ways, and yeah, I feel like that's on the cutting edge for sure.
Yeah, I wrote a book which is pretty much just a long list of things that I think have come in a positive sense from this new shift and new mediums. So I really struggle with the idea that there's a lack of good music or interesting music. It's just not my experience at all. I have lists of like 100 albums from this year that I think have been brilliant. Some of them literally are just very conventional albums made by major labels or indie labels, and then some of them are responding in ways that Kira's just mentioned to new technologies of immediate access, things that Margot's mentioned about like being able to access the past immediately. I think sometimes that's done in a very retrograde way. In some ways, it's done in a very engaged and politically activated way. So yeah, I think the one thing I never have doubts about is people's and artists' ability to respond creatively to their circumstances. So I think that's persisted, absolutely. It's just people's ability to reach that music and sustain a living off that music that's in question, I think.
And also you can get more context to the music you're listening to. It's less anonymous and you can find, information about even something niche that you're interested in. So I think that's a very positive thing nowadays, that you can really quickly get to the source of what you're looking for, and you can find out more about the artist very early on, and before even the person pops up.
I'm really interested in the way that people explore queerness musically, which overlaps with what Liam was talking about. And I think it's great that women who are vocalists are not devalued in the way that they were before, because people also understand how, or it used to be before, it's like, oh, she's the cute girl, Imogen Heap is this cute girl, and then there's a producer working behind the scenes. I mean, if you know Imogen Heap, that's not true at all. But then we're also thinking a lot about the voice and its various, what you can do with the voice, how you can manipulate it, but also how you can, with Anastasia, or if people love Chappell Roan's vocal flips, I think there's a lot more attention being paid to what the voice can do and its importance, at least I suspect.
There is a lot of pressure put upon creators when it comes to promoting, for a lack of a better word, the right people. Do you ever fear that your integrity will be questioned because you will promote someone, and it would, for example, later come out that they are not a person you are comfortable with promoting?
I think that's just the reality of today, where someone you like is gonna fuck up really bad, and then you just have to be like, well, I didn't know that before, and now that I know this information, I don't approve of them, or I still really respect their musical output, but I can't support the other aspects. I remember I was at Pitchfork at the time that Racine Murphy, I can't pronounce that right, but the whole revelations about her being a TERF came out, and the writer and the entire team really labored over that review. And I know the similar thought process has happened at all these other publications, where it's what do we do with this album that was gonna be album of the year for a lot of publications, given the fact that this woman has said some really horrible things about trans kids and their parents. And I think that ambivalence just made its way into the text, which at least for me as a reader, I appreciated. People wrote about what it was like as a critic and as a listener to then see the album in light of these comments, but also still respect the craft of it. And I'm never looking for reading criticism for the right opinion. I always just love the dialogue element of it, and so I thought that was a pretty good outcome of this terrible thing that happened.
I think obviously if it's just something that you don't know about, then it's just not context at the time that you've put something out. And then, I don't know if there's an onus on you to just make a statement or something, if you just reviewed an album positively and then years later something comes out. I don't know if that's necessary, but I agree with Kat about that really kind of long form reckoning when it comes to next reviewing an album. And I'm sure there's conversations had, because I've never been part of an editorial team, about whether to even review certain people's albums. And I don't know, there's so much nuance in those conversations as well, but obviously coming from a point of moral integrity and consistency is big.
Hi, you talked earlier about how AI was sort of, Kieran, I know you wrote a little bit about this in your column. You wrote about how AI is kind of eating away at the lo-fi beats scene. And as a lot of the common line about AI is that today is the worst AI will ever be. It will always continue to get better and better and better. So as AI continues to mimic aesthetics and sound, how will that shift the priorities of what we're talking about as critics and as listeners? And are we going to have to reprioritize something about music that simply can't be imitated by AI as it comes to like what we value in music and what we value in the art that's being created?
I'm kind of torn on that because I think for a lot of people it's like almost too far gone. Like from a listener perspective, I think some people are always going to just take the lowest common denominator, what they're fed. But as a critic and as someone who pays close attention, I think you're going to need to be, do a lot of research about the music and be very incisive about, what is actually happening in this song. Like, I think we're already quickly moving past the point where you have like the telltale signs of the robotic crackle in the voice and like the specific kind of Suno loops that you can expect. So, I think it's just going to take a lot more discernment, and like maybe there will be people valuing like a sense of groundedness. I think a lot of music now is very online and it's very de-territorialized in a sense where like in like the rage rap scene, people are basically making music for social media. Like there's no they don't really address their local region at all or take anything from that. And I think maybe people will start to value like a sense of community that comes attached to the music, and that could help separate it from just like anything tossed off trying to imitate a sound online. But I think that's a nuanced question. Got to think about that.
Yeah, I have a question. Here I am. Should I stand up? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yikes, sorry. I have a question for our non-Polish interlocutors because I found out that there's like some kind of, I'd say, fetishization. It's maybe a little bit too harsh of a word within Polish culture about the American approval of the stuff. Like, even on the new ones, there are like articles like 7 albums that were reviewed by Pitchfork and had a positive rating or something like that. And I think that in the context as a Polish person, I always kind of find it interesting but also confusing. Like, I think, as aforementioned, in the rap scene, there's also this like big impact, I think a lot of Polish rappers are kind of like trying to go as, I don't know, international as it should be, and like we are really celebrating the like some weird outtakes, the verses that are kind of sounding like sold for some money when they are put on the Polish albums. I don't want to say the names, but sometimes we are talking about international works with Polish and international artists, let's say American ones, and it so obviously sound like really clumsily put together. So I think from this perspective of like American approval, because I know, for example, that Margot promotes a lot of like stuff not from America but from around the world. How do you guys feel about this? I'd say decentralization of the journalism. Is it really possible to like have the equal, like this equity within the journalism, or will it always be this center in America, kind of like default country giving the stamp of approval? Is it possible to like have the I'm missing words today, sorry, but to kind of flip it on the head? How do you feel about the international journalism as being an American? So as I would say, us working from the American perspective.
Yeah, I think I have an answer. A year ago, I found myself with like a micro stan army of Chinese teenagers. They had read a review that I wrote for Pitchfork and had found out that I can kind of speak Mandarin, and they were like, "Oh my God!" And part of why they were even interested in me is they had never encountered like a full-time music journalist before, because in China there aren't there's no like publication like Pitchfork, like you don't get paid to review albums, and that is the case for many. That is the case in many countries around the world. I think people continue to read Pitchfork, yes, because of the name and like the legacy, but also it is one of the only places where you can read like a 600+ word review on like a single album, and even if you hate the opinion being espoused in that review, ideally there is enough of a argumentative foundation for you to then like for then your own thoughts on the album to be clarified. And so I think ideally what would happen is like there would be more publications here in Poland that are really dedicated to like thinking about the craft of Polish albums, and then like that becomes a more reliable source than Pitchfork, which sometimes Pitchfork pays attention and sometimes Pitchfork doesn't. Like I think just the flourishing of writing, regardless of the flourishing of writing and of like paying attention to the tradition and the craft of music writing is probably the most important thing to maybe loosening the hold that American music writers have on like a scene or critical reception, even though we Americans are always going to be too dominant.
I'm just going to add one thing, because there are a lot of publications. There are a lot of, here in Poland, a lot of places that focus solely on music and culture. But I think there's always going to be some kind of insecurity in everyone's heads that, well, this is, something that's, Western, that has more value than our publication, which is funny because when I wrote an article for Enemy 8 years ago, 3 publications in Poland wrote about the article that I wrote. And I was like, why? I was literally just like doing my master's degree yet. I was like, you probably have more experience than I do, so why would you write about it? So I think that's not kind of the issue of not having the outlets. I think it's more of like still having this kind of weird insecurity complex in our heads that, maybe we need to be pat on our back that, oh, you're also cool here in Poland, don't worry. So I don't think that's that's the issue.
I stand corrected.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think that no matter what, America is sort of the center of the world for a lot of people. Everyone just talks about Trump and how awful shit is there. But I don't know. I feel like it would be, I mean, I think, I'm sure lots of different countries have music journalism scenes, and I think that, you got to build it up some way. And I think that, even if America is kind of the center, then every country can have their own scene where they are paying attention to the music and, like you said, the technical craft. And I think, you should be proud of yourselves, and you don't need the approval, for sure.
There's a lot of American music journalism that is utter crap, I'll say. And we are at time. Thank you so much for coming and listening to this panel. I really, really appreciate it. And a round of applause for our panel.